The big new thing that we're going to talk about this week is grain. So grain is something that we usually think of as being bad, and usually it is, especially color grain. Color grain kind of looks like shit and makes everyone know that you're shooting digitally and that you're kind of sloppy with it. So grain, not something we want. But sometimes we do want grain. Sometimes we want it because we're trying to get some kind of specific aesthetic. We're trying to be more noir. We're trying to feel more gritty. We're just like pretentious, like whatever it is. One thing that is very good for grain is sort of bringing together bits of an image, right? If you have an image that is losing a little bit of sharpness, is going kind of off the rails, too soft, you've enlarged it too much, you've blurred it too much, throwing a nice layer of grain over the top of it makes it feel sharp, right? It feels sharp. It just feels sharp in high ISO, and will unify different elements. So if I have something that I brought in from another picture that I had to shrink down or enlarge a lot, if I brought in something where I had to do a lot of blur on part of it, grain will sort of tie that whole surface of the image together in a way that solves a lot of problems. So let's look at this snapshot image here. If you go over and look at my layers, which are happily nicely organized, we have some blur going on that has come in here and works with some spotting and some eyeball whitening. That's a bit extreme. Right, we've got all that stuff, and that has made the image look a little bit less jarring, right? You know, it's a perfectly reasonable image, but they're just a little sweaty. But if I go in here and look at it, you can tell that that blurring is kind of over the top, right? That is not something where if I made a print of this, you would be like, oh yeah, that's normal. You would be like, hey, wow, that is some sloppy ass retouching. Who did this? Let's have them fired. So what are we going to do? There's a bunch of ways that you can add grain to things. I'm going to show you a way that I think is the better way. The reason that I think it's better is because it is non-destructive, meaning that I'm not flattening my image and applying a bunch of grain to it. It's something that I can turn on and off. It's something that I can easily throw away and redo. One of the things with grain is that it is sort of specific to the scale of your image. So if I make an image that I'm going to print 30 by 40, right, I'll want to resize it up to 30 by 40 and then put that grain on top of it, and I'll sort of size that grain appropriately. You want stronger grain if your image is smaller, otherwise you won't see it. You probably won't actually need it at all if it's that small. If you make an image that's really, really big, right, your grain will be fairly subtle if you were to reprint that image at a smaller size. So that's why having grain as a separate layer that you can turn on, turn off, throw away, redo is a smart idea. So to do that, let's go up here on top. We want to have our grain on top of everything else. And I'm going to go up here and make a new layer from the layer menu. It's very important that we do that from the layer menu rather than just coming down here and clicking that plus. So new layer. I'm going to call it grain, and so should you. I'm going to ignore those other things, and I'm going to come down here where it says mode, and I'm going to set it to overlay. Overlay. When I do that, I'm also going to go there and check fill with overlay neutral color. Boop, there we go. Overlay blending mode. Any pixel on an overlay blending mode that is lighter than 50% gray is going to lighten the layers below it. Any pixel on an overlay mode layer that is darker than 50% gray is going to darken whatever's below it. So right now it's not doing anything because the entire layer is filled with 50% gray. That's what the overlay neutral color was. If I change the mode from overlay to normal, you will see, there we are. There's our exciting 50% gray. Come back here to, whoa, that's new, overlay, and it disappears. So obviously that is not doing anything yet. What we're going to do next is come up here to filter, noise, and add noise. When we do this, we want to be zoomed in at least to 100%. So cancel that Z on the keyboard for zoom, come up here and do 100%. You can also do that by hitting Command Option 0. Now, because I'm on some fancy Retina display, that's still kind of small. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more until it mostly fills my screen, and you probably should too. Okay, filter, go back here, noise, add noise, and you'll see by default it pops up with some kind of sparkly noise, and it's showing you a preview of it, right? Because we are on the grain layer, which if you're not on the grain layer, hit cancel, go back, make sure you have the grain layer selected, and do the add noise thing again. The preview is just grayness, but it's also showing it to us in the rest of the image, and so that's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and, sorry, just making sure that I am doing this properly, not missing any steps in the handout. Things that we want to make sure we have checked. So monochromatic. If we don't have monochromatic checked, you will get color noise. Color noise is gross and bad, and we do not want it. We just want black and white noise. So make sure you've checked monochromatic. Gaussian. All right, so your options are uniform or Gaussian. Gaussian is going to be a little bit more of a random distribution. I think that that's a positive choice. And then amount. Right, we make a whole lot of it. That's not good. We make none at all. Also not good. Let's dial it up a little bit more than we want. Let's say if I'm at 100%, yeah, I can still see that. All right, hit OK. So it's on there. It's too much, right? It feels like a bit too much. What we can do then with that is that I can do two different things. I can come over here to my grain layer, and I can pull the opacity down a little bit. All right. So as I pull that down, that grain fades a little. I could also go in and I could do filter blur, Gaussian blur, and I could do a very subtle blur on that grain to try and knock it down. Now, in this case, I don't think the blur is a good idea. I think it sort of makes the whole thing look a little bit unsharp. So I'm just going to reduce that opacity. And again, this is a personal taste thing. It's an eyeballing it thing. Make sure you're zoomed in close enough to be able to see. Right? If you're not zoomed in at least to 100%, you're not going to be able to evaluate what you're actually doing. But that is how we do grain, and it will save your bacon when you're trying to make some big enlargements. If you're trying to print something beyond, you're like, okay, I made my print size 30 by 40, but now my like pixels per inch is down at like 100, which isn't really enough. Okay, I'm going to have Photoshop make up some pixels, but now everything looks kind of mushy. Throwing grain over the top is a way to solve that problem to a degree and make your print look a lot stronger. So that's grain. You're going to need it for assignment 3.5 and perhaps also later on in your life. All right, next up, assignment 3.5.